Thanks, Mark. Okay, I think our final speaker of the night, of the day. So it's a real pleasure to introduce our next speaker. So David Unn is the president of Global Innovation Center of Samsung. It's a pretty impressive job when you think about the fact that there's 300,000 plus people walking around with a Samsung calling card, and he is individually responsible for assuring the innovation of that company. So big shoes to fill, a great background from both AOL and Google. He'll be interviewed today by Laura Mandaro from USA Today. So it's a real treat to spend the next few minutes hearing from them, and then we're on to have some cocktails and move on. So thanks very much. David?
We have to make this good because we're right before drinks, right?
Yes, the last speakers.
So let's start with some news. Global Innovation Center, which you've told me is a sort of part incubator. You also make investments. It's just about to open an office in Tel Aviv, and this is its first office outside of the US and Korea. So my question, just to start off, is what are you doing there and what took you so long?
Right. Well, maybe I should take a step back. The Global Innovation Center is a group that I founded, and how I describe it is we're a software in a 300,000 plus person company, a startup focused on startups. And what that means is we try to identify and empower entrepreneurs and startups to create breakout software and services to complement our hardware. And I started the group just a few years ago. We have offices in New York and here in Silicon Valley and in Korea. And so Tel Aviv is the first location outside. And so it's literally our first office. And in our minds, it's moving quickly to get into a place where there's lots of talent.
Okay, so are you like an IAC Interactive that wants to kind of invest in the next Tinder and hope for like an IPO and reap the rewards and everything else with that?
I think of us more as strategic investors as opposed to financial investors. What that means is that we have an investment arm. We also have an acquisitions arm. We do our own product development. We have a partnerships group that helps identify the right pockets of people in Samsung to meet with startups on the outside. So what that means ultimately is we're looking for any type of service or product that will enhance the experience that we create on our devices. And right now, for those of you who don't know, Samsung is the #1 in market share in mobile and TVs. And as we think about all the connected devices, and I think we've talked about this today, we think about not just the hardware functionality now, but what types of software and apps that can run on them. So if it turns into something that has an independent revenue stream and turns into a runaway hit app, great, but that's not necessarily our primary goal.
Okay, so one of the acquisitions Samsung has made is SmartThings, and would this be a template for the kind of acquisitions, and how does that come into the world of Samsung devices that many people around the world know?
So SmartThings was a company we acquired about a year and a half ago. And they still are an open IoT platform. They started as a Kickstarter campaign, actually, before that. And what we did is we acquired the company, and we are keeping it open. They've retained their identity, their email addresses, their titles. They have their own office. And what we've done is, as Samsung, we've become their biggest partners by offering to integrate our devices onto their platform. While still supporting their ability to be open. And so by example, what that means is that at CES, for example, this past year, we pledged that all of our TVs over time, starting from next year, would be SmartThings enabled, meaning that we would take what today is a physical hub to connect lots of different products in your home. We'd effectively embed that into a TV. And we're a company that sells 2 TVs a second. So if you're a software platform and you're looking for distribution, and a company that sells a lot of TVs says they will effectively help become part of your network and extend your platform to other devices or help you do that, that's a big deal. So back to your point, so Samsung in this case enabled SmartThings to have extra resources, to have distribution in stores, but also to have the leverage of having integration with its products. And it's one type of example where we think we bring more to the table than just capital, where we're trying to bring together different types of operational sort of integrations that are mutually beneficial.
So Israel and technology is often paired with the cybersecurity space, and it's known for prowess there. Do you think, does that fit into the Samsung picture, and is that too crude a view? Does that overlook some of the technologies that might be interesting?
Well, certainly cybersecurity is one vertical that Israeli entrepreneurs are quite well known for. In fact, we have a portfolio company called Zimperium, which is an Israeli-based cybersecurity company. But there's a whole host of verticals that I think Israeli entrepreneurs are well known for, whether it's machine learning or natural language processing or imaging. Security, as you said, but cloud infrastructure and services, et cetera. And so we're looking at those spaces, but I think it's an incredibly broad, diverse environment of entrepreneurs. And in fact, another portfolio company that we have is called Interlude, and they're a video production and distribution platform. And so that's not what you would typically think, perhaps, but there's a lot of great video encoding and distribution companies for many years coming out of Israel. So as a company, I think people know this, but we've been very focused on really identifying VR early and really trying to push the boundaries of what that could become. We've looked at IoT, smart things, et cetera. We spent a lot of our time thinking about mobile payments and commerce. And we continue to look at things like cybersecurity or security and machine learning and AI. But so there's a lot of great overlap with what we're looking for and what Israeli entrepreneurs have to offer.
So while everybody was here listening, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella was up in San Francisco, and he said that chatbots are the new apps. And he's really pushing this conversational commerce and AI-powered technology. You're probably always looking for the next enabling technology. Are chatbots the new apps?
They could be, they may be. It's not something that we've spent a lot of time on ourselves, but that, again, we have a particular focus on those areas that I just discussed. I think there's a huge opportunity for thinking about not just messaging and chats and what you can put around it, because there's been a lot of discussion around that. But taking a step back, really thinking about how do you promote human interaction and communication in different ways. And so that general lens is something that we've applied to different areas. So, for example, when you look at something like VR, a lot of people think, well, entertainment and games, which are obvious and very exciting. But when we think about VR, we also think about, well, how might human interactions change? How might you change communications? And if chatbots for commerce becomes a thing, then certainly there could also be opportunities for human interaction that guides commerce in VR as well. So I don't know that they're mutually exclusive, but we kind of look at it through different lenses. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So Samsung has made a lot of investments in Internet of Things, and it seems like that was a big discussion here. Where are we with everything? I know at CES this year there was tons of talking refrigerator type technologies on display. I think there's also a lot of public fear about listening in and security as the messages go up into the cloud. If you compare that to other internet cycles, what would you say? Or other tech cycles?
Well, obviously you have to take security and privacy super seriously, which we do. We take it seriously also as consumers, because we're all consumers. But at the same time, the app or functionality that you have on a device that does voice recognition, that's quote unquote listening to you, right? And the wondrous device that is able to do so many things based on voice commands, that has to be in a mode that listens to you, right? So, you know, it's a very thin line sometimes between things that are really smart and are capable of getting in front of you and anticipating and responding very quickly to what you want, and things that kind of get creepy or make you feel like there could be new precautions that you have to take. So, you know, I think it will slowly work itself out, but you know, I think the stance that most of the companies that we work with take are you have to give the user ultimate control over the level of openness that they want, how closely they want the technology to come into their lives. And you have to be transparent about it. And so the users will ultimately decide, but you have to give them the controls to do that.
Are there gaps in this? So perhaps the technology to listen and correspond with the human is being developed, but are there other places where, say, the different technology on different platforms can't talk to each other, or the security around it? Any gaps in this ecosystem that's growing pretty rapidly that you've identified? You're looking for the technology to fill that in.
Well, I think it's still early days across the board, you know, so take authentication, you know, people have talked about, you know, there's fingerprint authentication on so many devices now, and people talk about all sorts of biometric authentication. And so we look at that as a space that's still relatively new, where there are gaps, frankly, and it's a constant battle between coming up with the protections and hacking those protections. And so it's a space that we spend a lot of time thinking about. But I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but there's lots of gaps, which I think for entrepreneurs is opportunity across the board.
Samson, as you mentioned, has this widely successful smartphone in the hands of many. And for several years, that has been the device. But, you know, every year, half year, there's some other device where we wonder if it's going to unseat the smartphone. I think Alexa and Amazon Echo is having a little bit of a spot on the sun right now. Or maybe it's a car. Do you think, can you see a time, and if you're a betting man, place any money on the device that usurps the smartphone? Or is it a device? Could it be something else?
Not sure. So I think if we start to pretend or lean into something too heavily, you end up missing things, right? You develop blind spots. So our approach is to really support the products that are doing well and continue to push the innovation. So, you know, TVs have been around for a while, for example. And if you look at our smart TVs, our connected TVs, more and more consumers are absolutely connecting their screens to the internet and enjoying all sorts of different services. So we will continue to push and innovate on devices that have been around for a while. Smartphones actually have only been around for 8-ish years, so they're still relatively new. And I think they will be around at most of the world, still not yet even on the internet, right? And of those that are going onto mobile device, they're not yet all on smartphones. So there's still a lot of opportunity to introduce smartphones to folks and the internet to folks who aren't on. But, you know, you mentioned different devices, you know, whether autonomous cars or audio-enabled, voice-activated devices. I think we're going to see more and more of that, but that kind of type of functionality will be built in devices all around. Right, so you mentioned a refrigerator that, you know, we had at CES. It was really for the conference, but it had a 20-inch screen and apps running on it. And I think initially there were some who were puzzled by why would you put a 20-inch screen in the refrigerator? And when you looked at the apps and services, and actually there was one of our companies, a company called Sticky, that created the software for the display. It turns out, especially in the US, a lot of families are still communicating to each other by writing messages, photos, and pinning it on their refrigerators. And so in a world where people do have smartphones that are connected, couldn't you do that digitally, share calendars and share photos and notes? And that was the premise behind this refrigerator, and it won a Best in Show award. And so I think that the refrigerator's been around, but there will be different evolutions. And if last year you said, would you think about getting a refrigerator with a 20-inch screen? Maybe, maybe not. Would you think about getting a smart refrigerator, though, where it had a screen that helped you communicate with your family, but also had a camera inside where while you're away from home, you could see what's inside your refrigerator? Mm-hmm. Would that be interesting? How about a refrigerator that would tell you when you're running low on milk? How about a refrigerator that would pre-order or would enable you to buy the things? How about a refrigerator that would tell you you're running low on one product, but a competitor is offering you a coupon right now to order that product? And all of a sudden, what was just a refrigerator becomes a huge data gathering tool to help people gather information and make decisions and even purchasing. So a lot of the money and attention that consumer packaged goods are putting to try to get your attention as a consumer now have a different way of reaching you, and it just happens to be a refrigerator. So all that can be enabled through software and services that run on hardware. And so we think a lot about, again, what are those integrations, those combinations that really others will find compelling.
The one frequent criticism of startups coming out of Silicon Valley in the U.S. is that they tend to have a very U.S.-centric view of how the world works. For instance, mobile took off faster internationally than a kind of PC-centric U.S. market. Samsung, we also see that with mobile messaging apps. It feels like everybody's trying to copy WeChat and whatever else. But Samsung, being Korean and having a huge presence elsewhere, do you see technologies in emerging markets in Asia that kind of would leapfrog some of the technologies that seem to be so established in the U.S.?
I think how we look at it is because we are a global company, and by that I mean, we have over 300,000 employees. In virtually every country in the world. And so when we launch a product, for example, when we launch a new mobile flagship device, we launch it within weeks of each other in over 200 countries around the world. So to do that properly and to line that up, you have to have a sense of what the markets are like, and you have to have an appreciation for how consumers will respond. And so if you're looking to innovate, as we are, you recognize that innovation and talented developers are everywhere. Now, we in Silicon Valley enjoy a particular combination that allows innovation to thrive here. But I think more and more, to your point, we are seeing great ideas, great products that reach maturity in other places around the world. And what you're going to see is a lot of products that resonate here for US consumers that come from different places. And that didn't happen as much anymore in the past, but it will happen, the reverse will happen a lot. And we are seeing that absolutely because we're interacting with these folks in the course of doing our traditional hardware businesses.
What's the most exciting international market in terms of growth prospects?
Well, we're everywhere, so and it depends on what segment. We're seeing growth in a lot of places, so it's everywhere. I would not want to oversimplify.
It's not India, for instance, because that's a country that we've seen the big tech companies, feel like it's going to be China, where China was. I think Tim Cook said this, where China was in 10 years.
Well, India is a huge market, lots of consumers, and of course, very talented developers, and so we have a large presence there. And China, of course, goes without saying. But we're in regions all over the world. As a company, we're experiencing tremendous growth in the Middle East, for example, a fantastic growth in Africa. And for a while, South America has been a strong region for us. So, again, because we're a global company and we have different products, I think different regions represent different opportunities for us, but we see growth and opportunities everywhere. So I think to your point, it's not just the US or particular developed nations, but because we sell to all sort of segments, we see opportunity everywhere.
So just to put on your venture capitalist hat, you had been the president of AOL Media. You had been the global head of content partnerships at Google, if I got that right. So you've been close with the tech trends over the last decade. There was quite a bit of conversation over the last year that this tech cycle, which has been really fantastic in the US in terms of funding growth and the kinds of companies that came out of it, had reached maturity level. And we've seen some layoffs, some dry up of funding, although it's been inconsistent and still very big in some senses. What's your take? What does it feel like out there?
I definitely think it's a different environment. What we see is that anyone who is raising money right now is being encouraged to raise more. Anyone who's out there trying to raise money should assume that it will take at least twice as long as it used to. Folks that thought that they might be able to find different partnerships or exits happen should really have a plan B and save up a lot of dry powder. So in that sense, the market has changed and it's noticeable. And I think it'll be like that for a while. But on the other hand, as a strategic investor and an acquirer, what I think it does is it really helps focus and those companies and products that are organically very compelling will rise. And because we're strategic and not financial investors only, we can afford to be patient. And for us, what that allows us to do is identify opportunities that are truly strategic and that aren't sort of reactive or me too. And so we're going to this very thoughtfully, but we're not panicked. But I think if you're an entrepreneur out there, you really have to think about saving more for the rainy days that are to come, so you can enable yourself, right, to go through some choppy waters here.
Okay, that's good advice, and it's cautious sentiment. And it says time up, so I'll just hit you with the clincher. What's going to prevent it from being the 2008 scenario, which I think for many in tech and VC land was the worst that could be?
The difference is that there are companies, products that turn into companies that generate real revenue, that become bona fide businesses. And you're seeing a lot of those now versus, I think, back in 2008 and before that. And that will enable startups, even that are relatively early stage, to extend the runways that they have. The difference also is that there's a lot more tools out there and infrastructure to support smaller enterprises to continue, whereas before they might not have lasted as long. And then lastly, I think there are companies, and we've seen so many great companies here today and yesterday, that are now much more acquisitive and curious about working with small startups, ranging from acqui-hires to medium-sized, whereas before a lot of companies, including ours, might have been more interested in mature, larger companies. We're now interested in going in much earlier. So in that sense, I think it's a different environment as well.
Okay, well, thanks very much, David.